Batman Begins. A mediocre film turned into a really bad game. It was bogged down by some pretty bad combat, and some stiff controls that were a pain to handle. Also, in the spirit of the movie, many of the animations were pretty campy and tough to look at. Come on, Robin, hit him! Of course, not all versions of the game were the same, and that's why I've created this video program to show you the difference. Welcome to... The most obvious difference between the two versions happens right at the beginning. Both were products of Acclaim and Warner Bros. Interactive, yet both versions render the logos differently. Hardware differences aside, this seems to be strictly a design choice, since one port was likely finished before the other. The difference in color was likely due to the Genesis's limited color palette, or for the designers to associate the game closer to the Riddler, one of the movie's main villains. And the additional opening sequence featured on the SNES was probably a means to beautify the product. I'm guessing the Genesis version was completed first? What do I know? One of the more subtle differences made between the two versions was with the lightning color and effect. The Genesis sports a mild green, whilst the SNES version has an incredibly violent blue. It was brought to my attention that the differences between the SNES version and the Genesis might be related to Nintendo's family policy, often cutting violent or offensive material in favor of more family-friendly entertainment. However, this doesn't make a lot of sense considering the fact that the SNES version looks far more realistic and far more violent than its Genesis counterpart. From a technical perspective, I can't really say why this change was made at all. It may have been an attempt to beautify, much like the game's opening. Without a doubt, the one thing kept consistent between all ports of Batman Forever were the controls. That is, how consistently bad they were. Similar to Mortal Kombat, non-melee moves required button combos, but some of those moves were essential to progress through the game. For instance, the grappling hook. On the SNES, the grappling hook required you hold select and aim in a direction to fire. This is ludicrous, considering that both of those buttons are on the left side. The Genesis version was far more sensible, only requiring you to hit A and B at the same time. Don't get me wrong, the Genesis had its fair share of problems, but the problems that it did have were either equal to or one-upped by the SNES version. There are further minute graphical differences between these two games, as well as one big curveball. Let's talk about the curveball, shall we? Hold on. This is the loading screen for the SNES version. You heard me right, loading screen. Why this version required a loading screen, I have no idea. It's not as if the game was rendering anything technically advanced, given the colors and graphics were slightly up-resed from the Genesis version, but I see no call to have a loading screen at all anyway. Aside from that hitch in the road, everything else seems to be pretty minuscule. The UIs differ between versions, though I prefer the Genesis's one. It's far more simple, whilst the SNES version looks like a mess of textures. The SNES version also features Batman doing a bat roll when selected at the character screen. It's really nothing much, I just thought I'd point it out. One last thing I have to say actually has nothing to do with the difference between the two versions. In fact, it's something that they both have in common and I think really should have been changed. Specifically, the names. Every enemy in the game has his or her own unique name, and some of them range between the bland to the outlandish. My particular favorite is Anglophile. All it really is a person who has appreciation for Anglo-Saxon culture, specifically the culture surrounding the British Isles. I'm not exactly sure why he's an inmate, unless he attempted to kill Two-Face, because he's half red.